Back during DC Comics Rebirth, DC fans were basically in comic book nirvana, a perpetual state of having a comic book stiffy because there were so many awesome ongoing series at the time. Green Lantern was great. Superman was great. Action Comics was great. Titans was great. Aquaman was great. There are so many good runs going on at that time. You know, even people liked Tom King's Batman. If you like James Tynion, he had a Detective Comics run. There was just wall-to-wall good stuff. You were a DC fan, you needed to be in your comic book shop every single Wednesday because that was a great initiative. You had Jeff Johns, who knew the characters, who cared about the characters, promised the fans, hey, we're getting back to the heart of what made them special. We're going to bring back the very best versions of the heroes that you love. We're going to put them in one functioning, cohesive universe, and we're going to deliver you the very best stories possible that we could. And they did that for about a year and a half, maybe 2 years, somewhere around there. Unfortunately, Dark Knight's Metal happened, and they decided to go a different direction. You know, the trade dress came off, and basically the quality went along with the trade dress, and DC Comics has been basically calamitous ever since. I saw an article on ScreenRant.com talking about like the best comic books from DC since Rebirth. I said, you know what? Not a bad idea. Let's go back and look at some of the best DC Comics stories that have been released since Rebirth happened, as long as they didn't have the DC Comics Rebirth trade dress on it. It could be Elseworlds, or it could be stuff in continuity afterwards. And I found one thing completely shocking about all this. The amount of stuff that DC's produced worth reading that isn't in continuity. Almost none of it is. Almost all of them are Elseworld stories, or they're like some weird future version of a character, or they're a one-shot that doesn't actually tie into the continuity of everything that's happening. There's only like 2 or 3 stories that I'm going to mention, even in the honorable mentions, and obviously the top 5 that I'm going to go into, that are actually in continuity. Most everything that DC Comics has produced that wasn't DC Comics Rebirth in continuity isn't worth reading. It's absolutely shocking the amount of effort that they're putting to make sure their Elseworlds titles and stuff like that, alternate universe titles, are really, really strong, and putting almost no effort into their in-continuity titles. And it's going to be borne out in the list that I have for you. These are the titles that I thought were really strong, but didn't quite make the top 5, the best of the best since DC Rebirth that wasn't actually in Rebirth. Robin and Batman doesn't make it. Batman and the Joker Deadly Duo, fantastic, doesn't quite get there. Batman TMNT from James Tynion, Volume 3, doesn't quite make it. Batman the Imposter, Batman Superman World's Finest from Mark Waid, doesn't make it. Action Comics World Saga, in continuity, pretty damn cool. Not quite good enough to make the cut. Superman 78, Robert Venditti, my favorite writer, doesn't make the top 5. Silencer and Damage as well, from the New Age of Heroes, that I thought were awesome series. And we don't even see those characters anymore. But those are really, really good runs that apparently everyone has forgotten about. But if you want to see a character in DC Universe that maybe you're not familiar with, and you haven't read Silencer or Damage, I say go check them out because you're probably going to like them. Now let's get into the 5 best comic book stories DC has told since DC Rebirth. Now, one of them did take place during DC Rebirth, but it didn't have the trade dress because it was Elseworlds. Little caveat there. Let's get into number 5, Future State Swamp Thing, released in 2021, Ram V writing, Mike Perkins on art. Afterwards, Ram V and Mike Perkins did get the ongoing Swamp Thing series that they ended up producing, which quite frankly isn't very good. It's really boring and monotonous, but Future State Swamp Thing was absolutely breathtaking. I was like, oh my goodness, I can't believe what Ram V and Mike Perkins are doing there. They were even doing like homages and tributes to one of my favorite comic book issues of all times, Anatomy Lesson from Alan Moore and Stephen Bissett, which I still think is the best illustrated comic book in the history of comic books. And this is right up there with it. It's fantastic stuff. I love Swamp Thing. I don't love Future State. And this was really the standout series that really kind of changed my mind, at least about a couple of the ideas that they've done there. Unfortunately, this is easily the shortest story among it. There's only 2 issues to it, but it's definitely worth your time and money if you want to see some really trippy art and basically a Swamp Thing, the end type of story, to where you have other Swamp Things and they've evolved, but everything is collapsing around them. And it's a really cool story. And quite frankly, I was hoping that Ram V would get the gig on Swamp Thing after this. And I got what I wanted. Unfortunately, it ended up being disappointing. Do not read the Ram V Swamp Thing series unless you want to be bored. If you want to see the good stuff, go to Future State Swamp Thing, released in 2021 during that absolute failed event that was supposed to be 5G. They tried to reconfigure it and make it work. It absolutely did not work. At number 4, I'm going with Deceased, released in 2019. Tom Taylor writing, Trevor Hairsine on art. A lot of you know that I'm not the world's biggest Tom Taylor fan. In fact, I think anything Tom Taylor does in continuity is basically garbage. But for some reason, if you give this guy an Elseworlds type setting or a multiversal setting, he just goes ham on it and actually writes a good story, whether it be Injustice. I know a lot of people like Dark Knights of Steel. Me personally, I think Deceased is an absolutely fantastic comic book story. And, you know, it's basically just DC characters in a zombie universe, you know, in the zombie apocalypse and all that kind of stuff. It's not the most mind-bending concept in the history of the world. It's certainly been done before. But Tom Taylor really outdid himself on this one. It's the character moments that he was able to build between a young Damian Wayne and Bruce, as Bruce is basically turning to the dark side and kind of falling away, or the moments between a young John Kent and Clark Kent, as Clark Kent realizes his time is over and his days are numbered and it's time to say goodbye. And you get these super duper hard hitting character moments that absolutely define the series. And you certainly do get lots of gore. You get some blood, and you certainly get zombies and a pretty trippy cyborg mother boxes and all that kind of stuff that go in with it and make it a really good story. But it's the character work and the way that he was actually able to elevate the younger characters, because quite frankly, Tom Taylor was able to kill off the older characters. It's quite easy to see John Kent step up to the mantle of Superman when Superman's like literally flown into the sun and is consuming it. It's pretty easy to imagine Damian Wayne taking over as Batman when he witnesses his father dying and he gives him his own Batman uniform and all that kind of stuff. There's some pretty good moments with Alfred in there. And we even get, I think Dinah ends up becoming the Green Lantern, maybe. There's all kinds of weird stuff going on in that story, but he was allowed to do it because it wasn't in continuity. There were basically no strings on Tom Taylor and his writing and Trevor Hairsine and with his art to where they were able to kill off all these characters and let other younger heroes rise up to the occasion, and it was quite enjoyable. There are 2 sequels to this with varying degrees of success. I certainly say read them. I think they're perfectly fine, but neither of them touches the quality that Deceased had in the first place. And, you know, when Tom Taylor actually wants to write a fun comic book story, he can actually deliver it. It just sucks that he often has no interest in doing that. He just kind of wants to preach to you using the characters and stuff like that. But definitely, if you haven't checked out Deceased, and you want to see some zombies or horror DC stuff, that is the series to read. Coming in at number 3, The Flash, issues 768 through 800, starting in 2021. Jeremy Adams writing, Fernando Pasarin on art. And this is the only in-continuity DC Comics story that's even going to make my top 5. In the amount of cards stacked against Jeremy Adams coming onto this book, with what Tom King had done to Wally West in Heroes in Crisis. Now, I will admit they did try mightily to fix the character afterwards. Josh Williamson had tried, Brett Booth had tried. People had put in a valiant effort to kind of revive the character and maybe save him from what Tom King had done to him. But then Scott Snyder in Dark Knight's Death Metal just took an enormous dump on Wally West again. And there wasn't much interest in the character after you took the sign of hope, the symbol of hope in the DC Comics Rebirth, and basically turned him into a serial killer. And Jeremy Adams was able to take the pieces, the broken pieces of Wally West, and put him back together again, focusing on what makes Wally West special and what makes him unique within the DC Comics universe, and really making it an all-ages, family-friendly book, concentrating on Wally getting his family back together, going and getting his kids, bringing them back, reinvesting himself in his relationship with Iris. And really the entire Flash family ends up joining by the end. And it's just an enormously enjoyable experience to see somebody in Jeremy Adams who I didn't know who he was before writing The Flash. You know, obviously he had done some work for Warner Brothers, DC Animation and stuff like that, but he was a complete unknown commodity when it came to comic books. And seeing the TLC, the hard work that he put in to Wally West the Flash to try and revitalize the character, and guess what? By the end, people were responding. He actually got like a little mini Flash event there at the end. I think it's called 1 Minute War. And the sales were kind of rising and rising and rising. They weren't jumping, but they were going up and up and up. And by the end, when they had announced that he was leaving the series for Cy Spurrier, he was actually a top 50 selling book, which it hadn't been basically ever since the end of Josh Williamson's Flash run when Tom King destroyed the character in Heroes in Crisis. He was actually able to salvage the character, make it marketable again. And what did they do to reward that hard work and dedication? They removed the character, put somebody else on to destroy him once again. And unfortunately, the Flash is not in good state right now. But if you like the Flash, you like Wally West, that is the series for you. And I'll put this out there. They put Jeremy Adams after that on the Green Lantern series, following up what Jeff Thorne had done. Jeff Thorne really shot for the stars. He wanted to do something mind-blowing and absolutely enormous, and he basically shattered the entire foundation of the Green Lantern Corps in the process, and they handed all that to Jeremy Adams, a busted character, a busted mythos, with no enthusiasm behind it after the Grant Morrison run, which quite frankly sucked, and the Jeff Thorne run, which was quite frankly far worse than that. And he's actually picking up the pieces. He's taking the broken shards of Green Lantern, putting it back together, and doing something awesome. And he's likely to make this list here in a couple of years if I do something like this again for Green Lantern, because if he continues on the trajectory that he's doing right now, he's going to fix that character too. This dude is literally the fixer when it comes to DC Comics. Somebody breaks a character, you put Jeremy Adams on the character, and he actually takes the pieces of what was broken, puts it back together, and refixes the character for him. They will likely remove Green Lantern from him as soon as the character was marketable again and put him on another busted character, because apparently they do not appreciate Jeremy Adams like I do and a lot of DC Comics readers do at this very moment. And coming in at number 2, we do have Batman the White Knight. This is the earliest release in 2017. Sean Gordon Murphy writing and illustrating this one. In fact, of all the books on this list, I think in 20 years, this is the one that'll consistently still be read. It's not in continuity. It's not even really a true interpretation of Batman. It's got Batman in there, but there are definitely some major changes to it. We've got Harley Quinn, who's more like, I don't know, a scorned lover type thing. But then we've also got like the Neo Joker, who was the Harley Quinn that replaced Harley Quinn, that decided to come up and replace the Joker. And we have the Joker reverting back to his good self and running for office in Gotham. And what really separates this story, the fact that it's self-contained is cool. And there are sequels to this. Me personally, I don't like the sequels to White Knight. I don't think it ended up working out very well because he concentrated too much on this stupid Bruce Wayne, Harley Quinn romance thing that was never going to work and just made it eye-rollingly stupid to me. In my opinion, it was like, I'm not buying into this. But Batman White Knight doesn't really have that in there. And you get all these new interpretations of the members of the Batman family, you know, working between the GTO and all this kind of stuff. And it's a whole lot of fun. You know, he actually makes Duke Thomas work within the DC Comics framework of Gotham and all that kind of stuff, something no one else had really been able to do that time. And it's the fucking car chases. Basically, you get every iconic Batmobile that you can think of in this comic book, all a part of one enormous chase scene at one point. And it's just phenomenal stuff. The craftsmanship, the creativity, the new understanding or idea of what Batman could be. And it's so much fun. If you have not read Batman the White Knight, I think you are missing out on something that truly should be cherished. And Sean Gordon Murphy, you could see he put his heart and soul into that book, and I think it paid off very, very well. It's unfortunate that a couple of the ideas just kind of poisoned the well after that, but in the beginning, Batman the White Knight was absolutely badass and something I think, if you haven't read it yet, you would absolutely enjoy. Coming in at number 1, the book that was better than Batman the White Knight, which I do think will be read in 20 years from now, even more than this, is Man and Superman, released in 2019, Marv Wolfman writing, Claudio Castellini on art. And what's interesting about this book is I think it had actually been on ice for like 15 years or something. Marv Wolfman had like an anthology book, or there was a Superman anthology book that Marv Wolfman was supposed to write in. And he had this story that he wanted to publish in there, and it was all ready to go. And they never released it. It basically just sat in a drawer at DC Comics for years. And they finally decided to release it in 2019, Man and Superman. You know, and for my money, if you want a great Superman origin story, I think that you should go to Man of Steel by John Byrne. I think it redefines the character. Absolutely fantastic stuff. A lot of people will say, like, maybe Birthright from Mark Waid. Absolutely not. If you want an alternative take on the origins or the early years of Superman, actually go read Man and Superman from Marv Wolfman. As much as Mark Waid loves the character Superman and certainly gets the character Superman, Marv Wolfman will write circles around that man when it comes to this origin. It blows Birthright out of the water, and it's definitely the best DC Comics story released in the last 5, 6, 7 years, something like that. It's absolutely fantastic. You actually get to see Clark Kent in the early days as Superman, leaving Smallville, going to Metropolis, trying to find a job, knowing he has powers, but not really what to do with it, but wanting to make a difference and failing a lot along the way, trying to help people out and having it backfire, or doing this and accidentally leaving traces of himself behind to where people can catch him, and finally really discovering himself and becoming comfortable with who he was going to become when he became Superman. And is an absolutely fantastic origin story, early years of Superman. If they wanted to do a Superman year one, it should have been Man and Superman from Marv Wolfman. They should have expanded a little bit, but it's absolutely fantastic. If you have not discovered this story and you love Superman, you are missing out on an absolute treat when it comes to the storytelling and the love for the character that Marv Wolfman has. And certainly the art by Claudio Castellini really, really helps on that one. So those are my 5 best books that DC has released since Rebirth started that aren't Rebirth themselves. Future State Swamp Thing, Deceased, The Flash run from Jeremy Adams, Batman the White Knight, and Man and Superman. And like I said, I do think it's very, very troubling that the vast majority of all this stuff, not only on the list, but the honorable mentions as well, are almost all Batman, but they're almost all out of continuity. The best stories need to be in continuity. The best stories in continuity get you excited for what's happening and going and exploring other titles and other events happening in the DC Comics universe. And they are not doing that. They're releasing good stories, but they're almost all self-contained and have nothing to do with anything else happening in the DC Comics universe, which I think is an absolutely enormous mistake as far as I'm concerned. If you are a newer comic book reader, or maybe you're new to DC Comics and you're looking for the best stories and you found this video, it just so happens that my good friends Joe Corallo and Eric Breen and I a few years ago went through and walked people through the best starting points in all of DC Comics for the best characters that they have to offer. If you have not checked this out and you want to know the groundwork of DC Comics and the best jumping in points, the best parts to go in there and get the best back issues, you need to check out this video right here, waiting for you to discover all the amazing DC Comics characters.